The Rust programming language is falling apart. Core Rust team members are resigning. Companies are abandoning the Rust project. The outraged Rust community even created a fork of Rust called Crabling, in protest of corporatism and shady decisions from Rust's core leadership. What is going on and how does this affect the future of Rust? In this video, I'll explain the newest controversy surrounding RustConf 2023 as a result of overreach from the Rust project leadership, how it relates to the trademark fiasco back in March, the mod team resigning back in 2021, and the glaring failure of Rust's entire governance model. I'll also talk about the Rust community's overwhelming negative response and backlash. And finally, I'll give my personal thoughts on this entire situation. Trying to figure out who's in charge of the Rust programming language is actually quite difficult. There are two primary organizations. First, we have the Rust Foundation, which is a non-profit organization stewarding the Rust programming language. They do things like fund Rust maintainers, give grants for Rust-related research, fund the maintenance of official Rust websites like crates.io, and more. Second, we have the Rust Project, which is a community of volunteers working on the Rust programming language itself. It's made up of teams such as the core team who manage the general direction of the Rust project, and other more specific teams like the compiler team and the moderation team. There are also working groups who steward specific initiatives such as the Async working group and the CLI working group. The Rust Foundation and the Rust Project work closely together. The Foundation provides financial support and other resources to the teams, and the teams provide feedback to the Foundation on the needs of the Rust community. Besides working on the Rust language, the Rust Project also helps organize Rust conferences and events, and that's where RustConf comes in. Janid Manid, also known as the PhD, a notable figure in the C and C++ community, was scheduled to be a keynote speaker at RustConf 2023, the largest annual Rust conference. However, something went terribly wrong. On May 26, the PhD wrote a blog post explaining that he was no longer speaking at RustConf because he was mistreated by the event organizer and put in a very uncomfortable position. The PhD never intended to give a talk. Instead, he was invited to give a keynote speech by the Rust project leadership, which he graciously accepted. The PhD made it very clear that his talk would be about compile-time programming, which is part of his exploratory work at the consultancy firm Shepherd's Oasis. It's also worth noting that this work was directly funded and supported by the Rust Foundation. Everything seemed fine until the PhD got some devastating news. Rust leadership changed their mind at the last minute and told the PhD that his keynote talk would be downgraded to a regular talk, which, as you can imagine, is very insulting given how much time and effort goes into creating a keynote speech, and the fact that they explicitly invited him to be a keynote speaker initially. The reason given for the downgrade was that the PhD's talk was about exploratory work that did not represent the official direction of the Rust project. Many people believe that this reason was bogus because previous RustConf keynotes included exploratory work, and the PhD made the topic of his talk very clear from the very beginning. Understandably, the PhD felt insulted and decided to opt out of the conference altogether. Afterwards, he released a blog post describing his experience and informing his followers why he was no longer speaking at RustConf. Normally, a speaker opting out of a conference wouldn't cause major outrage, but given the recent string of controversies surrounding Rust's core leadership, the Rust community responded very strongly to this news, which triggered a chain of events. 2 days later, on May 28th, JT, who is a member of the Rust core team, announced that they were resigning from the Rust project because of how the PhD was treated. The same day, various figures in the Rust community voiced their concerns, including Faster Than Lime, who published a GitHub gist titled "The Wrong People Are Resigning," where he called out that issues often stem from leadership's tendency to use back channels rather than following established processes. The Primogen also published a reaction video on his main channel calling for transparency and change from Rust leadership. Because of the outrage, the Rust leadership team was scrambling to mitigate the damage. The next day, the Rust leadership team released a blog post apologizing for how the PhD was unfairly treated and acknowledged the glaring failure in their decision-making and communication. The same day, the two main organizers of RustConf released a joint statement on Twitter apologizing for the situation. And the next day, two members of the Rust project released statements apologizing for their individual role in the situation. One of the members, Josh Triplett, also announced that he would be stepping down from the Rust leadership team. Despite the various statements, apologies, and action steps taken to remedy the situation, on the same day, Shepherd's Oasis, the consultancy firm the PhD works for, released an official statement saying that they were withdrawing from the Rust Foundation's grant program, abandoning their compile time programming investigation, and withdrawing any involvement with the Rust project moving forward. Now, this may seem like a strong reaction to what should have been an isolated event, but there's a major underlying problem. This is not the first time the Rust core leadership took actions that caused major tension with the broader Rust community. The Rust project has a moderation team who is responsible for moderating communication between other teams and holding people in the rest of the Rust project accountable to the Rust Code of Conduct. In late 2021, everyone in the moderation team resigned because the core team, who manages the overall direction of the Rust project, refused to be held accountable by the moderation team, which defeats the whole purpose of the moderation team. What's worse is that many people in the Rust community felt like the reason for the resignation was too vague and there was more to the story that was not being shared. Another instance that demonstrates the failure of Rust's leadership and governance model happened in March of 2023. The Rust Foundation released a draft of their new trademark policy, which sparked massive criticism for being incredibly restrictive and resembling a corporate money grab unfit for a nonprofit organization. Given this history, you can see why many people in the Rust community feel like Rust's governance model is failing. In fact, the Rust community forked Rust and created Crablang in protest of corporatism and shady decisions from Rust's core leadership. The promise of Crablang is to be a language with all of the memory safety features you love, but with 100% less bureaucracy. All this drama is making people in the Rust community extremely concerned. Rust is just starting to get major industry adoption, and we are seeing signs of Rust finally going mainstream. This has been the hope of the entire Rust community all along. However, with the recent controversies, many are now concerned about the future of Rust. How much will these controversies set back Rust's progress? Will Rust remain to be the most loved programming language? Now let me give you my personal opinion on this entire mess. Before that, make sure you get your free Rust cheat sheet at letsgetrusty.com/cheat sheet. So am I personally concerned about these recent events? Well, the short answer is yeah, of course. I mean, I've put years of my life into this language and this community, so I truly want for it to succeed. When I read the PhD blog post, I was truly disappointed. I mean, if I was in the same situation, I would feel betrayed, for sure, and probably would have done the same thing and opted out of the conference altogether. Also, when the Rust Foundation released a draft of their trademark policy, I was honestly shocked. If that policy actually went into effect, it would have forced me to completely rebrand this channel and change the type of content I could create for you guys. Now, in terms of the Crablang fork, I know people have mixed feelings about it. Personally, I think it has done some good by pressuring Rust leadership to improve. But if it gains a lot more traction, I could see it turn into a bad thing because it would create confusion and slow industry adoption. In light of all these problems with Rust leadership, I do think it's very important to point out that they are trying to improve. For example, in response to the RustConf controversy, the Rust leadership has said that they will start enforcing a consensus model for decision-making, and they would help fast-track launching the new leadership council. Also, with the trademark policy fiasco, Rust leadership did apologize and are updating the trademark policy based on the concerns raised by the Rust community. All of this makes me hopeful that the Rust leadership and governance model can improve in the future. But let me know what you guys think about this entire situation in the comments section below. Before you go, make sure to get your free Rust cheat sheet at letsgetrusty.com/cheat sheet. Like this video and subscribe for weekly Rust content. With that said, I'll see you in the next one.